First, I want to tell Cameron, thank you for reading the whole, book of Matthew, right? It felt like it, I'm sure. And you may be wondering, goodness sakes, Pastor, why did you choose so much? Well, these are the difficult sayings, right? The tough sayings of Jesus. And you'll notice the sermon title is, He Said, What? So throughout the sermon, I'm going to call on you to say that with me. So we have to practice before we get into it. So I'm going to say some of these tough sayings, and you're going to say with me, He said, what? Okay, try it one more time. He said, what? With attitude, He said, what? There you go. You got it. You'll know when it's time. All right? She said, what? Oh, let us pray. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be acceptable to you, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. Amen. Well, great things are accomplished in this world, not necessarily because of extraordinary people, but that certainly does help, but because of great leaders who provide the inspiration and motivation to achieve things greater than themselves. When we are inspired, we can do nearly anything. We can achieve seemingly impossible things. In 1960, our country was falling behind in the space race. The Russians were miles ahead, putting a man in space first, and it seemed impossible that we would ever catch up. And when John Kennedy became president, he made it a top priority for our country to be the first to land a man on the moon. And in his famous speech on September 12, 1962, he did his best to persuade the American people to support that dream and the Apollo program, which was just beginning. In the historic speech delivered to a crowd of more than 40,000, Kennedy spoke with a sense of urgency and destiny. And he emphasized the freedom enjoyed by Americans to choose their destiny rather than have it chosen for them. He shared, we choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and to do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills, because that challenge is one that we are willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone. Do you remember that pep talk?
Yep.
Do you remember watching it or maybe seeing it through the years? Well, what about Yoda's speech in The Empire Strikes Back? Do you remember that pep talk? When he said to Luke Skywalker, do or not do, there is no try. Do you remember that?
He said what?
Wait for it. How about Robin Williams in Dead Poets Society when he challenged his students to think outside the box and to make the most of every day? Do you remember what he said? Carpe diem. Seize the day. Make your life extraordinary. A good speech or pep talk can not only help us achieve an impossible moon landing, but it can help us win football games. I think of football players in the locker room getting that pep talk from their coach. Promoting social change. Pep talks unite a team or an organization, and it can inspire a crowd to greatness. Now, most pep talks require the speaker to challenge the listeners to believe something that they have never believed before. Going into space, being inspired to greatness, to win when the odds are against us. Well, Jesus' Sermon on the Mount is just such a pep talk. It's inspirational. It's instructional, and it's challenging, especially challenging, I would say, the scriptures for today. In this teaching, Jesus invites people to envision and enter into a way of living that is different from the world around them, Last week we saw this in the Beatitudes, and this week isn't any less challenging. Jesus gets down to the crux of what he expects of his followers as God's children. The scripture today from Matthew 5 is sometimes called, as I mentioned earlier, the hard sayings of Jesus. Hard because they are counter to what had previously been taught. Difficult because Jesus takes that status quo, the Ten Commandments, and raises the expectation. The law was the standard, and Jesus was teaching his disciples that we must be better. We must go farther. We must not stop at simply following the rule or the commandment. We must look into our hearts and consider whether our hearts are in line with God or not. Now, being compared to salt or light doesn't seem that outlandish, right? That probably was fairly comfortable, although the thought of being thrown out for losing that commitment, that's a little tough, right? We might ask ourselves, where's the grace? But Jesus expects us to keep the faith, to light the path for those who are in darkness. And then he speaks about anger, and he compares it to murder.
He said what?
He's on the payroll. Well, he said that being angry with a sister or brother having unresolved issues would be as detrimental as if we committed murder.
He said what? I
know. Jesus knew that what was in our heart was what was important. It's a window into our soul. And Jesus wants us to be reconciled to one another, not to harbor ill feelings, but to resolve differences and to demonstrate love to one another. And then Jesus gets a little personal. He gets into our heads, and he says that if we even look at someone with lust, pretty much we've committed adultery. Right? Well, I am all for noticing handsome people. Ask my husband, he'll tell you I have boyfriends in every state. Not really, but I like a handsome man, I'm not going to lie. But I'm here to tell you that I'd be lying if I said I haven't gone down that rabbit hole once or twice over a really attractive person or man. But Jesus is telling us here that we must demonstrate self-control.
He said what?
We gotta be self-control. Well, could it be that Jesus knew what would distract us from our ministries and our jobs and families? Distract us from the calling he's placed on our lives? If we are continually being pulled into sin, Jesus says we must do drastic things to correct ourselves. Cut out our eye or cut off a limb.
He said what?
God knows our hearts. Simply keeping ourselves pure physically, but letting our minds wander into the gutter causes the same result of sinfulness to our soul as if we committed an act or not. And then Jesus continues his teachings, moving on to divorce. Now, teaching here on divorce is contrary to our current traditions and laws. Many of us in this room have experienced divorce and the devastation that follows. Divorce can be granted here in Nevada, no fault. Takes a day, right? Bam, it's done. And simply put, we can just choose. I don't wish to be married to you anymore, Mr. Johnson. And voila, D-I-V-O-R-C-E-D, divorce. Well, Scripture is different. Jesus says the only grounds for divorce is unfaithfulness. Jesus was reminding those within earshot of the original meaning of marriage, that two shall become one, and it grieves God when we break our covenant with him. I swear to God. Oh, wait. That takes us into the next one, which says we are to make oaths to God, no pinky promises. The key verse is verse 37. Let your word yes be yes and no be no. Anything more than that comes from the evil one. We are to be people of our word. We must be known for truth telling, and truth matters. If we are always being truthful, then there's no reason to say an oath or swear to God, right? I mean, I always think it's funny when people say, no, really, I'm telling the truth. Or, well, do you want me to be honest? Well, as opposed to what? Being dishonest? I guess that happens, right? I guess that maybe they mean sometimes they aren't, and they want to check with us to just be sure that we really want to know the truth. Sometimes something I learned many, many years ago in the corporate world is that the truth always comes to the surface. Always. Now that's just a little extra tidbit you can take home with yourselves today. Now we move on to an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. You've heard that one. If anyone strikes you on your right side, you're to turn the other side also.
He said what?
Oh, you guys are getting sleepy, aren't you? I'll hurry. I know your blood sugar is going down. You mean we can't retaliate? If someone messes with me, I can't get them back? I'm supposed to demonstrate grace and love rather than vengeance. Jesus calls us to respond to others with love, not hate, to overcome evil with grace. He never said that it would be easy, but it is what is required of us to be disciples of Jesus Christ. Which leads me to his last teaching for today. We are taught by Jesus to love our enemies, not just those who are lovable. Oh, much better. This is the essence of Jesus' teachings. God is love. We are filled with God and God's love. Therefore, we must demonstrate that love to all, not just those we like, not just our friends on Facebook. We are to become like Jesus and love the tax collector, the sinner, the demoniac, the leprous man, and the prostitute. We all have people in our lives that we really just don't care very much for. Hopefully, they're not in the room here or at home. And I pray that none of us are harboring hate for someone. Because when we look at those who have done us wrong, we have to evaluate ourselves in light of Jesus' teaching. Am I able to express love, or am I stuck with feelings of hate in my heart? Now I want to be clear. Demonstrating love for someone who is an enemy doesn't mean you allow them to take advantage of you. It simply means that you will not allow your own anger and hatred to rule you. This is about what we are holding on to in our hearts, not about that person, that enemy. It's liberating to pray for your enemy, someone who has done you wrong, and know that in God's perfect timing, the wrong will be righted. And while you are waiting, you can develop a heart of peace because you've handed the problem over to God. Pray for your enemies and those who persecute you. Trust me, don't mess with their head, right? Now, I'm guessing, if you're like me, some of you are maybe squirming a little in your seats at some of these teachings. And I've been divorced. And thankfully, I remarried the same guy, so I'm safe, but what if that happens, right? Before you go throwing in the towel on your Christian faith, thinking that it's just too hard, too difficult, I remind you that because Jesus came to this planet and taught us these crucial lessons, he also provides a way for us to pick ourselves up when we fall down. Jesus' death on the cross paves the way for our salvation and for our slate to be washed clean. When we don't measure up, Jesus picks us up. And when we do the worst, the very thing we promised and swore we never would do, Jesus wipes away our tears, and offers us grace and forgiveness, just because we ask Him to, with a sincere heart, and we are forgiven. So let's take this lesson for what it is, a great pep talk that can inspire all of us to greatness, that can make us better than we are, and one that if we truly did the things Jesus asked, our world would be transformed. Kindness, love, and forgiveness would reign. Can you imagine? One person at a time would come to realize that being a Christian is the way to live this life. And being a follower of Jesus Christ means something relevant and real. They would truly be able to know that we are Christians because the love that we demonstrate to our neighbor and to the world. Let us pray.